Hello, everyone. My name's Rosemarie Milsom, and I'm the director of the Newcastle Writers Festival. Thank you so much for joining in with this, I suppose, hastily put together online program. As you know, we were forced to cancel the festival 3 weeks ago because of the COVID-19 crisis, and we know now that it was the right decision. At the time, a little bit nerve-wracking, but as circumstances have changed so rapidly, it was definitely the right decision. Unfortunately, the 160 writers that were in the program couldn't be here this weekend in Newcastle, but a few of them have lent their support to this endeavour of ours, this little experiment, and I'm grateful to everyone who got involved. As I said, it's all been done very quickly, but with great enthusiasm, so thank you. Late last year, I applied to Creative New Zealand for some funding to bring 5 New Zealand writers to the Newcastle Writers Festival, and unfortunately they obviously couldn't come with circumstances unfolding as they have. But I thought it would be really great if it was a possibility to catch up with a couple of them. And one of those writers is Miriam Lancewood. I first came across Miriam a couple of years ago. I was at Byron Writers Festival. Hello to the team there, the amazing team led by Edwina Johnson. And if you've been to Byron Writers Festival, you know it's held outside in Marquees. And I was walking across the lovely grounds there in my own little world, and across my path, there was this sort of Amazon that came into my line of sight with a bow slung over her shoulder. And I thought, who is this woman? And then I went to a couple of sessions she participated in, and it was brilliant. It was brilliant hearing her story, and I think really timely actually to be speaking to Miriam about this book. Miriam's book, Woman in the Wilderness, is an account of her 6-year, I suppose, exploration of wilderness in New Zealand. And it's not just the one place. She moves around, and she has to learn to hunt. And her and her partner Peter forage, and they move to different parts of New Zealand, and it does conclude with this almighty trail, essentially walking the whole length of both islands. So it's a fascinating journey, and I think at a time when we're stuck inside and we're probably craving a bit of nature, it's incredible to be immersed in this pristine world. Fresh air, animal life, the flora and fauna she captures so well. So I think it's a really perfect time to actually be talking about this book, given the circumstances. Kia ora, Miriam. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me in this interview and organising all this.
Where are you talking to us from?
At the moment, we are in Golden Bay, New Zealand. That is the northwest corner of the South Island. And
it's been a little while since this book was published, so I'm really interested in I know in your mind it's probably even longer, that your journey began, and actually I just want to read the first sentence, because I think this, when I first started reading this book, from the first sentence it gives you an idea of what you're getting yourself in for. It is a beautiful winter's day, and I am walking with my bow and arrows on the side of a mountain in search of a wild goat. There you have it. That's the start of this captivating story. Tell us a little bit about what led to that decision. You left your teaching job. People asked why. It was quite a big move to get rid of all your belongings and, trek off with a backpack and about 3 months' supply of food. The basics, though, as I said, you're going to hunt and you're going to forage. So what prompted that decision to do this?
Well, for a start, it has a little bit of history. I met Peter in 2006. That's now 14 years ago. And the moment I met him, we've been traveling and we've been living rough and always on a shoestring. We've been to countries like Papua New Guinea, and eventually we came to his home country, which is New Zealand. Mm-hmm. I was born in Holland originally. So we had all these years of adventures and living differently. And then I had to work for 1 year as a teacher, physical education teacher, because that's what I had studied in Holland, to get my residency. But during that year, I was, of course, missing that life of adventure and the traveling. And every weekend we used to go out in the mountains, camping and hiking, and we never want to come back on Sunday night. We said to each other, why can't we just live here all the time? That'd be amazing. Because we didn't really want to continue living in a house for which you have to pay money, and having a car for which you have to pay and get the petrol and maintenance and all these costs for all these things that we didn't really want in the first place. So to make that choice of let's live in the mountains for 1 year was not as radical as you might have thought, because it comes across in the book a little bit that I might have been working for 10 years or something in school, but it wasn't quite the case. But yeah, we wanted to live in this beauty of the mountains, and we wanted to be part of nature rather than just an observer. Because when you go hiking and tramping and camping, you're sort of looking at scenery, isn't it? You make a picture, and then you look at the pictures when you come home, and you sort of feel a distance. And I wanted to be completely connected to the wilderness, completely part of it. And hunting has really been very helpful in this process.
In what way?
Oh, when you're hunting, you are completely part of life and death. You are taking life, which is a horrible thing to do, but it also gives you life, because we were, in the game of survival. We were living out there and hunting and gathering like all our ancestors did. And so, and hunting also, I had to learn all these skills and reawaken all the senses, like my sense of hearing, my sight, everything improved majorly.
And in a way, when we have that kind of environment where you're in a school, but we work in offices, I often think that our senses become a little bit dull because they don't have to be sharpened. But like you mentioned, when you're hunting, you're alert, you're tuning to sounds, to smells, and so in a sense,
because it's part of your survival.
It reignites them all those senses.
Yes, indeed. And also when I'm in town, I want to block out all these noises, the air conditioning, the fridge, all these machines that just go on and on and on. And I think most brains have adapted and they block out all these annoying tunes in a way and vibrations. Yeah, it's like adaptation.
It's interesting because I've just recently reread the book because we were going to be talking at the Writers' Festival, and I'd read the book about 18 months ago, and I thought I'd better refresh my memory. The very first mention of a pandemic in this book, because it's mentioned a couple of times by different people, is when you're sort of having your farewell from your school and your manager says to you, I suppose you'll learn all these skills and then when we're all get hit by a pandemic, we'll run into the hills and come looking for you for help. And that's really interesting because when I read that the first time, I didn't even pay any attention to that reference. But now in this environment, it comes up. Your Peter's brother mentions it, and then you encounter a doctor who you become friends with. While you're on one of your sort of, you're not in the Southern Alps at this point, but you do encounter this doctor, and Peter asks her what her main concern would be for the future, and she says a pandemic.
Yeah, indeed. I think people have been waiting for it, especially in the medical areas. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I wasn't waiting for it. Maybe I was completely naive and burying my head in the sand. But I honestly didn't think in my lifetime that we would be dealing with a pandemic. As I said, maybe it's naivety on my part. But so that's really interesting. Can you talk us through the process? I mean, you start off in outside Marlborough, and it's the Southern Alps. And you have to shed all your belongings because you're essentially both carrying in a backpack with some basic food supplies like flour and cups of tea. I mean, tea for cups of tea and, the very bare essentials. And you get to this incredible environment, which I'll get you to describe to us in a moment, but it's difficult at first, isn't it? You write about suddenly the day opens up to you and it's quiet and there's calm, and it seems to me that you're someone who's a real kind of go-getter and really energetic, and you struggle with that, don't you, initially, that sense of, well, what do I do now? We're here, but what do I do now?
Yeah, indeed. So we had been preparing for almost a year to get out here. And when we finally get to the wilderness, we were dropped off. And it was amazing. We said to each other, aren't we lucky? Aren't we lucky to live here? This is absolutely stunning. And then the second day, I thought, oh, my God, what am I going to do? There's nothing to do here. It is, there is just so much time. And bear in mind, I just came from like working in town and being in contact with my family and friends, and they're quite busy indeed. And suddenly there was nothing to do because we also didn't take any communication device, no cell phone, not that it would work, but nothing like that, not even a clock. So that's also, we had no idea if the time was actually passing at all.
Because you end up, you go to bed very early, don't you? And Peter remarks, Peter remarks a couple of times about how long you sleep. I mean, you have these really rested, sustained periods of sleep, which I think is the envy of all of us, to be honest, in our hectic, crazy lives. So it's like your whole body rhythm alters in this environment.
Yeah, indeed. So we set out in May, which is autumn, and the days was already quite short, indeed. And well, we had no choice. We just went to bed when it's dark. I mean, you can only sit so long around the fire, and it got a bit cold, and then we went in the tent. And it's amazing how much we still could sleep. And after weeks and weeks and weeks, then still able to sleep. Like, I'm talking about 13 hours a night. You know, that's more than my toddler nephew. It's amazing. And I think that's really good for like hibernation. But in the beginning, the first 2 weeks were really difficult because my mind had to slow down. And my mind was in the rhythm and the speed of, say, a town city. And suddenly I had to slow down into the rhythm of nature, just so much slower. And Peter said, oh, you know what you have to learn? The art of doing nothing. And I thought, well, that's weird. I've sort of avoided that all my life. And now I have to do nothing, not even meditation, because meditation is something, right? Yeah. Sometimes there was just nothing to do. But after 2 weeks, my mind became slow, much more in tune with nature. And then I could just sit at the river and look at, you know, the leaves falling or, you know, the beauty of it. And it's so well worth going through those first 2 weeks. But in those 2 weeks, you have to go through a period of restlessness and boredom. And that's exactly what we taught to avoid, right? So, sometimes you need to go through boredom to get to that peace, that peace state of mind.
Describe the Southern Alps. I'm embarrassed to say my first trip to New Zealand was last year when I went to the Auckland Writers' Festival. And I'd been, you know, it's one of those things I think a lot of Australians feel, oh, we'll definitely go. And thankfully I went. Not only is it an amazing festival, hello Anne O'Brien and her team there, and sadly both that festival and also Byron have been cancelled for this year, along with ours and a number of festivals. So I'm thinking of everybody there. But I didn't, I was in Auckland. So, I mean, that's like saying I've been to Australia and I've seen Sydney, but that's not the whole of a country. And so you went to a very specific part, the Southern Alps and the South Island. Can you describe that environment for us? So if we haven't been there, we can get a picture in our mind of what it's like.
Oh, it's very diverse. If you go to the West Coast, it's very wet because all the weather comes from the West Coast, hits the mountain, falls as rain. So the West Coast is wet, East Coast is dry. And that looks like sometimes like Mongolia, like a desert, you know. But the places we are looking for is always a river for water and for washing. And we drink out of the river because it's super clean and super pure and very good. And We wash ourselves in the river. We do the dishes in the river. So the river is everything. And the river is always very loud because it falls quite quickly because they're in the mountains.
Yes.
And so it's super loud. You might not think of that, but it's like a roaring river always. You always have to sort of shout when you're near the river.
Mm.
And then we're looking for forest because we need wood to cook on because we always cook on a fire. And we're looking for big beech trees. It's mostly beech in New Zealand, in the mountains, mountain beech. And we're camping underneath the huge branches and on top of the roots. So it's quite amazing to be so much in, say, the tree consciousness, whatever that is. And so we need that for wood. And in the day we go exploring and we might walk up the river. The river is like our guideline, so we never get lost. In the beginning, I was afraid to get lost, but actually that's impossible. You just walk up the river, which you can hear at all times, and go further up and up and up. And in the end, the river becomes a little creek and big boulders and rocks, and you might have to climb. And then you come slowly to the top of the mountains. And quite often, there is a little lake, like a pond. And you have the feeling that maybe no one has ever seen it because, it's so small. It's not like a tourist attraction. And and then you're among all that rocky environment. And that's also the place where we sometimes see chamois and tar. It's like a mountain goat. And it's amazing to be in such a dynamic environment. And the dynamics is caused by the weather. That you might wake up in the morning very nice and clear, and as it is now, it's always windy here. You might hear the wind even on the audio. The wind brings new weather, so we could easily have snow and hail in the afternoon. So that makes it very exciting.
Yeah, it's in a way the weather becomes your television. It's the stimulation, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed. But also the weather indicates what we're going to do. If it's raining, we just have to sit in the tent and we play and read books. Or one book. Of course, we don't have many books. And when it's good weather, we get out straight away because we have to take our chance. Yeah. Very different from the outback in Australia.
Yeah, the complete opposite. You took this journey with Peter, your partner. Tell us a little bit about him and what impact this experience, because it was extended over 6 years, and as different periods, you might take up accommodation in an isolated hut somewhere. You sort of meet these people, and your journey takes different paths over these 6 years. You're not based for 6 years in the Southern Alps, so it's good for a reader because you get to get a taste of a lot of different parts of New Zealand. So I really enjoyed that. But who's Peter, and what was it like? Because I think a lot of people would struggle to, although I suppose now we're in isolation, where it's probably challenging us as in our relationships, possibly the same way, because you're with each other all the time. I know that there are periods where you do take little, you go off on your own. You feel very strongly that you want to have some independence within that dynamic, and you'll go off for a couple of days hunting, etc. But overall, you spend a lot of time together. And so tell us a little bit about Peter and that the impact this experience had on your relationship.
Yeah, I'll first revert a little bit to your first question. Yeah, we always stay nomadic because after 1 year in one place, we sort of feel like, wow, this country is so amazing. We should be seeing other places. So that's why we always move around. And we never stay. We stay 2 years for 1 year at a time. All the rest, it's been a few months and sometimes only a few days. So always moving, yeah. And I think that is also the dynamic part of our relationship. That I don't know if Peter and I would go doing very well if we had to stay in one place. If we actually settled down, I think our relationship would deteriorate. Because then it's maybe too much the same. Yeah, it's sort of something I discovered recently. So I think it's really good for us to keep moving. But Peter, I met Peter 14 years ago in India. I was 22 and he was 52. So it's a huge age difference, as in 30 years. And had I met him in Holland, where I was brought up, I think I would have thought he was too old. I mean, he's like almost the same age as my parents, after all. But in India, everything is a little bit crazy, and you can just about do whatever you like. And I feel very little judgment as a foreigner. And so I thought, okay, I hang out with this person because he told me that he used to be a university lecturer in New Zealand. He gave up everything. He sold everything and went with one little backpack to live in India. And he already lived there for 5 years when I met him. I had never heard of somebody doing like this. It was like a total new experience to meet a person who had left everything behind. So that was a good starter, very good first impression. And I was looking for somebody to walk the Himalayas with. Now, every summer, he used to go into the Himalayas, traveling over all those mountain ranges by himself or with other people. And he was also looking for somebody to climb the Himalayas with, and so we went together. And after this amazing journey, which was still the most amazing journey in my life, it lasted only 2 months, but
it's a pretty special place, isn't it? I've trekked in Nepal and in the Annapurna Ranges.
The scale of things, it's unbelievable.
It is. It's. I mean, but at least in New Zealand, you've got decent mountains. I mean, we can't even really make that claim here in Australia. The foothills in the Annapurna Ranges were taller than our tallest mountain here, Mount Kosciuszko, and we got up to 5,000 meters. And that's just really baby mountain level in the Himalayas.
Yeah, but when you climb the 5,000 meters, we did 8 mountain ranges, 5 over 5,000 meters, which is, as you say, not that high there. But altitude, you can't breathe. So it's really tough going. But anyway, we did that trekking together, and I thought, well, just let's see how it goes. With Peter and I thought I'm never going to sort of marry him. Let's just see how long we can travel. But 1 year became 14. And it's interesting. Actually, it's really interesting to be together for so long. I never expected that because you sort of build history together and you know each other really well and you can depend on each other. It's a real beauty in it, I find. Yeah, so despite the age difference, we get on really well. And I think it's because we're so different. He is very academic. He cannot stop reading books. he learns so much. That's really his passion, reading books. And I'm
you want to go out. You want to go out on your own and use your bow and arrow and catch a goat. Why goat?
So I go hunting and he does the cooking.
Yeah.
And he reads all those books and he gives me a summary of those books. Yeah. And so we're very, very different. But I guess because of that, we're not competing. And I think in a lot of relationships, the couple are so similar, almost like brother and sister, and they never stop competing. Anyway, it might be the case with some couples, but it works very well with us.
There are moments. I mean, I think it's interesting because the subtitle of the book is A Story of Survival, Love, and Self-Discovery. So there are discoveries you make within the relationship, not only about Peter but about yourself and how you are in a relationship, and I suppose what you need and he points out at one stage, not that you've become codependent, but I forget the phrase he uses. But I think he almost prods you in a way to sort of, to have agency to. I mean, not that you don't. You're a strong woman. I'm finding it hard to explain it, but in the context of the book, it does make sense when you're reading it. You'll be able to explain it better. Do you know what I'm talking about? There's a point where, even within the relationship, he says, let's shake it up a little bit.
He says interdependence. Yeah, he always encourages me to be able to be alone because let's face it, one day I will be alone. Most likely I will outlive Peter. And so I knew that from the beginning. And so I always encourage myself, and he encourages me to do things on my own and to think independently, to be independent and all that. Yeah, so it's good.
Can we just touch on the hunting aspect? Because as I said, I remember the first time I saw you, you had your bow slung over your shoulder at Fire and Riders Festival. And it's a beautiful bow. I mean, it's such a striking instrument, and it's not something you see every day. Definitely not anything you see every day. But hunting, it's not easy. It's not, I mean, from reading the book, it's not an easy process, and it's definitely not an easy process using a bow and arrow. Yeah. And I found some of the most compelling parts of the book is when you go hunting, and because you go off on your own and you're learning to listen and to look for clues, and you make mistakes. You have there's that failure, that initial big failure when you sort of get an animal, but it's not quite complete, and the animals, and you struggle. You struggle with causing suffering, and you struggle even when you do eventually kill an animal, and you've got to process that. I mean, cut the animal up and take it back to camp and cook it up. And I think we all like to think if we were pushed, we could all do it. But having read your book, I don't know that we could all willingly or just automatically do that, even if our survival depended on it. It's a big leap, isn't it, in the way we think about animals, the way we process killing an animal.
Yeah, indeed. I think you could learn it though, because our ancestors survived this way. And I grew up in Holland. My mother was vegetarian, so she never cooked meat. So I had nothing to do with meat or animals. We ate rice and lentils, So I learned this, but it was a long learning process to learn how to hunt with a bow and arrow. First, I started off with archery. For a year, I spent practicing shooting on a target. Every day, I shot 30 arrows. Every single day for a year. Then I thought, right, I'm pretty good at this. I'm ready. And of course, it wasn't anything like that. That first winter, I never saw an animal. I never saw one, because shooting on a target is something totally different from finding an animal. Where are the animals? We thought over the whole South Island, there are always some deer, some goats, some pigs, some possums. But no, some areas are full with goats, and some areas are full with possums. They're not evenly spread. So all those things we had to learn. But to finally come, that was the first summer, then I finally shot my first goat, and this is the horn of the first goat that I shot with a bow and arrow. Because it was such an achievement. I was so incredibly happy. You couldn't imagine how relieved I was that I finally did this after basically 1.5 years of practice and losing so many arrows and so many times failure. I felt like a failure, coming back with nothing, But finally I shot that animal, and it was a small goat. And it was tragic because the Billy and the nanny, the parents, stood around. I shot the little goat, and all of us understood that I was not going to shoot anybody else. And so they stood around for so long. And eventually the Billy said, let's go. But it was just so tragic that I had tears in my eyes when all this happened.
So they were grieving. They were mourning the death of their child.
Yeah, and they're sort of very puzzled, like, what has happened? Oh, little Billy. And then in the end, they sort of reluctantly went away. And, anyway, I did it. And then I carried a little goat on my back for an hour. I had to walk back to camp. And then the elation of this achievement, I was extremely happy and relieved, and Peter too.
Because you're not just hunting for fun. You need the protein. That's what comes out in the book. You go to bed hungry at times, and there's only so much sort of kind of damper you can make, that what we call damper, the bread, that's not sustainable. You can't. It doesn't sustain you. And at different points, you're doing quite lengthy walks, and it's physically demanding. And you talk about when you eat meat, the boost it gives you.
Yes, indeed. So that first winter, I never saw an animal with my bow and arrow, but we trapped a lot of possums. And it's totally illegal in Australia, but in New Zealand, they're classified as a pest and they want to get rid of them. So everyone is sort of trying to reduce the numbers. Not many people are thinking of eating them, though. And they're actually very good meat. But I did manage to trap possums in that first winter. And that's when we discovered how much we needed the meat to keep warm. Because we started to lose weight and we started to wake up with hunger pains in the morning for not having enough calories, because the beans and rice wasn't enough in the high mountains. We were at 1,000 meters up. It was really cold. Ice everywhere, waterfalls were frozen, and we were sleeping in our little tent, keeping warm around the fire. But just the rice wasn't enough.
You end up, so you move around a bit. You do encounter different people, and what becomes clear is that you're not quite ready to sort of settle back into everyday life. You're not ready to go and rent a house, and you get experience of that. There are different periods where, you head into civilization and have a break, pick up supplies, connect with people, get on the internet, madly email your parents, or, let people know you're still alive. But so you decide to do this. You decide to do this famous trail, which runs the sort of all the way from the top of the North Island all the way across both islands to the south to Invercargill. An enormous trail right through the middle of the two islands. I kind of thought, are you serious? When I read that you were doing that after everything you'd been through, I thought, wow, these guys are pretty amazing. They want a challenge. And Peter's a little bit concerned. I mean, it is physically arduous, and that it does challenge you. It does challenge you because you're not staying in the one spot for the length of time that you had been at previous locations. You're moving.
No, it's totally different. Yeah.
Yeah. But what really struck me when you were describing this walk is you get scared a couple of times in the book, but the ocean is unnerving to you. You're unnerved by waves and
it's really frightening. Have you seen the West Coast?
but to an Australian, I just think, really? I mean, my 9-year-old gets out in huge surf, 4 or 5 meters, not meters, feet, I should say. She swims and takes on big, like in Australia where the big waves and surf are part of our understand. We grow up with it. And I was so, here you are, you've climbed mountains, you've trekked, you've hunted animals, and then when you start this trail, it's the ocean that you find. It's very unfamiliar to you. And I suppose growing up in the Netherlands, that's obviously why.
Although the Netherlands does have the North Sea, but that's very calm. Nothing like the waves on the west coast. And I see no one swimming there. No one goes near the water. So maybe I sort of pick up on the general idea of the ocean is dangerous. Seventh wave will get you, sort of a thing. But yes, I think I am now familiar with mountains and rivers, and I know how to cross rivers, and I know how to sit through a lightning storm. But the ocean is relatively unknown to me. And what we did after the Te Aroa, probably in your questions after, but we started walking through Europe, and suddenly I had to deal with bears. And I was shit scared. Never been more scared in my life.
Did you encounter any bears? Did you encounter any bears?
Well, we didn't see them, but we did see their footprints. They look exactly like a human footprint, but in big, like 5 toes. Yeah, it's amazing. And all very fresh in the snow and that. So, they were definitely around. And the villagers were saying, oh, don't go sleeping out there. You get eaten by a bear. So well warned. But yeah, I have no experience with dangerous animals. And if you are in Australia, in the outback there, I guess people are way more accustomed to snakes and crocodiles.
You don't even have to go to the outback. I mean, Newcastle's pretty. We have snakes in bushland just on the fringes of Newcastle, and that's a big city. So we're accustomed to venomous spiders and snakes. But of course, we don't want to encounter them. We're not looking for them. It's not something that we're so relaxed about that we're like, oh yeah, there's a snake. Like I think everyone has that primordial sort of response to seeing a snake. But yes, we do have a lot of, unlike New Zealand, we do have a lot of dangerous animals. Yeah. At one point, I'm looking at the time now thinking, I've got so much more to ask you. But I do want to draw your attention to, at one point, Peter says, now I made a note of it. He says, whatever it might mean, this pure and wild place, and that's when you first start, should change our consciousness. And I wondered if you could talk just a little bit about that. Did it change your consciousness? Was it as straightforward as that?
It's hard to, because consciousness is such a deep level in a way. It's not so easy to sort of gauge that. But we want to find out what happens with our body and mind when living in such beauty and in such an isolation. So indeed, I think it has changed us. Surely it has. It's been now nearly 10 years ago we set out to live in the wild. I think I have a lot more awareness generally, and my senses have all improved, what I said before. Eyesight and my hearing and the sense of intuition and, general awareness of things. And this is really good, but it's kind of hard living in civilization because then you also notice so much. And, for example, I think things like fear, and this is quite relevant to the corona now, is very contagious. And maybe you can pay attention to it, just how contagious this is. So you are, for example, feeling quite happy, and then suddenly you meet someone else who is afraid, and suddenly you feel that fear, quite physical, in your own legs. I feel it in my legs, in my own body. And then I think, hang on a minute, I wasn't afraid to start with. And I'll obviously pick this up from someone else. And I think this happens all the time. And not only with fear either. This happens, with energy and all these things. I find it fascinating.
Well, it's interesting because you're talking about encountering someone almost physically and that fear transferring. But I think too, and I know that you're not active on Facebook or social media, but now that's another way that fear is transferred. It's transferred through social media. So you can, open up and, maybe your Facebook account be having a perfectly normal day and then someone posts something and you feel it, if you're in a certain state of mind, it just sort of almost leaps off the screen and starts affecting you.
Yes, indeed. And I think we have to sort of protect ourselves a little bit or just be aware of it. If you're aware of it, it can come and go easier. But if you identify with it, then that fear has become you, right? So, and then you have to sort of go and process it, and it takes such a long time to think your way out of it again.
So, Miriam, before I have to let you go, I'm interested in your perspective on the coronavirus. I mean, New Zealand obviously has been in a strict kind of lockdown for about a week now, and the Prime Minister there has been praised for her kind of her strong approach to this, her quite dramatic in a way, but I think that everyone else is looking at her decisions and seeing that there's merit in it, definitely. How are you finding it? I mean, you're free, you look like you're in a nice open place and you're not stuck in an apartment in downtown Auckland, which I think would probably not be very good for you or your well-being. But this idea that you've lost that freedom to just go wherever you want, and how are you being affected by it all?
I will first explain, since 1 year now, we are living in this natural place, sort of off-grid here in Golden Bay, because I have been writing my second book. And it's called Wild at Heart, and will come out in October. And just yesterday, I have finished the manuscript. So that's why I'm very cheerful today. And I am free once again. But
so we had to be you've kind of been in a form of isolation for some time then, writing a book.
Yes, indeed. Stuck behind a laptop. So we had to be in a place with electricity for the laptop. But since a week, New Zealand is in lockdown. And it is amazing how quiet it is. Because when we came out of the wilderness, or out of the mountains, we always feel, quite literally feel the noise. It's like the hum of a mega machine. And it's sort of a relentless noise. And now, since a week, we feel like it's quietened down. The mega machine has come to a grinding halt. Long may it last. It won't. Of course, things will come back to life and the home, because it's an economic disaster. That's what I think. Yeah. But while we are in lockdown, people can take their time for contemplation and a little bit of reflection. And I think only good things come out of it, because then people are a little bit forced to look at their life and their meaning of life and the meaning of their job and the meaning of driving up and down to the office. And they might make some good changes. I think on a personal level, for people's personal life, this is a very, very good moment. On an economic level, it's a disaster. I think we're going, the years of abundance, I think, are finished. And we're going into a different time. But what there will be, who knows?
That's it. None of us know. That's one thing you can guarantee. Not even the experts can guarantee with any certainty how we're going to be thinking or feeling in 6 months' time, or where we're going to be at in 6 months' time. So it's challenging. It's kind of across the board, isn't it? It's made us all equal. That uncertainty. No one's protected from that, really.
Well, what a momentous moment! 2020. We're never going to forget this year. No, it's amazing.
It is. It is extraordinary. And I'm not going to forget it either, because it's. I never thought I'd be cancelling the Writers' Festival because of a pandemic. I can tell you, if you told me at Christmas time, or even we launched the program 3 weeks before we cancelled, if you told me that night, this amazing night, everyone in great spirits and celebrating the program, if you'd said to me that night, look, in 3 weeks' time there's not going to be a festival, I would have thought you're crazy. I mean, the coronavirus was not a known thing, but not, I think it just has taken us a while all to kind of deal with it. But I am so glad that I've had this opportunity still to speak with you, and I want to thank Creative New Zealand, because the funding was provided, and all your flights, your 5 New Zealand writers were booked, and they've been incredible since cancelling and providing their support, and they're excited that we've gone ahead with this conversation. So I want to thank everyone at Creative New Zealand, also the Publishers Association of New Zealand, who I've been dealing with in terms of the logistics of everything. So thank you, and thank you for tuning in on a Sunday. Thank you for being here, and Miriam, all the best, and I look forward to the new book, and hopefully we'll get you back to Newcastle and you can come and visit our city when everything calms down, and talk about the new book. And if you do come, I want you to bring the bow.
Yeah. What a spectacular effects.
And if you'd like to buy Miriam's book, there's information in the session description. You can click through to our wonderful bookseller, Maclean's Booksellers, and you can buy Miriam's fantastic book, Woman in the Wilderness. Perfect read for this time.
Yeah, and it's also an audiobook.
Also an audiobook, that's right. And you'll be transported. And I think that we all need a little bit of that at the moment to sort of just escape our much our closed-in, narrow life at the moment. So it's a perfect read. Take you to some incredible parts of New Zealand. And look, it's made me so desperate to get back to New Zealand and spend some more time there. So I'm looking forward to that. It's a great tourism advertisement, I think, for New Zealand. So and look, if you do want to support the festival, we obviously lost our main source of income with the loss of the festival, you can donate. There is a link also in the session description, and we really appreciate your support. And hopefully we'll be back bigger and better in 2021. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Miriam. Take care.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.